First event of our Spring 22 lecture series entitled Just Design. I'm Karen Nilsson. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture. And at the BAC, we have been recognized with distinction for our leadership role in educating an extraordinarily diverse student body to help bring about social equity through the design of landscapes, interior architectures, historic preservation, design for human health, and more. Today, we have a talk between two thoughtful architects who are educators and advocates. They began a dialogue almost 10 years ago that is still ongoing. Dawit Benti earned his bachelor's degree in architecture and urban planning from Addis Ababa University. He holds a master of architecture degree from the Indian Institute of Technology, where his thesis was Holistic Design Strategies in Green Architecture. Currently, he's a PhD candidate at the Ethiopian Institute of Architecture, Building Construction and City Development, also known as EIABC, and his dissertation's working title is Political and Socioeconomic Underpinnings of Modern Architecture of the 1960s in Addis Ababa. Dawit Benti has extensive teaching experience in educational institutions, including ETH Zurich, Adama University, and EIABC. In 2013, with Professor Petra Gruber, he initiated a master's in advanced architectural design. That program is one in which he's now teaching contemporary architecture and theory of architecture at EIABC for first-year students in the program. In 2016, Dawit, along with David Rifkind and Jürgen Strohmeyer, curated an exhibit that's on view now at the BAC entitled Post-Millennial Architecture in Ethiopia. In Addis, Dawit is a frequent speaker on the radio and television regarding architecture and urbanism. He is the originating administrator of two Facebook groups, one Ethiopian Architecture and Urbanism, another African Architecture and Urbanism, and he has a private practice called ProSpace Design Build, and he's busy with architectural practice in Ethiopia. David is an architectural historian who's also educated as an architect, who worked in Boston as he earned his Bachelor of Architecture degree at the BAC. He went on to McGill to earn his master's in architecture, and then to Columbia University to earn his PhD. David's doctoral dissertation, Quadrante and the Politicization of Architectural Discourse in Fascist Italy, won the 2011 James Ackerman Prize for Architectural History from the Centro Internazionale di Studi di Architettura Andrea Palladio in Vicenza, and was subsequently published in The Battle for Modernism in 2012. This past July, he became director of the School of Architecture at the University of Florida after spending 14 years at Florida International University. David studies urbanism and architecture in Ethiopia from the late 19th century to the present, and his current book project, Modern Ethiopia, Architecture, Urbanism, and the Building of a Nation, incorporates field research in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti with archival research in Ethiopia, Europe, and the United States. And I had the pleasure of hosting a conversation between Professor Dawit Benti and David Rifkind just over a week ago. So we're gonna listen to that, and Dawit is on the call to help us answer the chat, and we'll field questions at the end of this conversation. So I'm gonna attempt to share screen, and let's see if I can do that. I'm not sure if it's going. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Let's see if I can try this again.
Karen, try turning off your video and then share again. Sometimes that works.
I love that idea. Okay, it's not happy. Let's try it again. Okay. With that, David, would you speak about your connection to Dawit?
Sure. My name is David Rifkind, and I'm a 1992 graduate of the BAC, and it's great to be back in connection with architecture in Ethiopia that Dawit Benti and I co-curated with Jürgen Strohmeyer originally in 2016, and that we're now revising in light of some of the really remarkable changes that have happened in Ethiopia over the last 5 years. Dawit and I met in Addis Ababa in 2015 through Zeleke Bele, who's one of the extraordinary architects in Ethiopia today, and who's represented with several projects in the exhibition. And we just met one morning at the Taitu Hotel and hatched a plan for this exhibition, which came about relatively quickly by academic standards. Within 18 months, we had already opened the exhibition in Miami and in Addis Ababa, and then also opened a smaller version of it here in Gainesville, where I'm now the director of the School of Architecture at the University of Florida. By sheer coincidence, this was before I was ever really involved with the US. But the exhibition was out of our modern and contemporary architecture in Ethiopia. And as Dawit's going to tell you, Ethiopian modernism has this kind of extraordinary lineage that goes back to the late 19th century, essentially with the founding of Addis Ababa, where the modernism comes from and all. But one of the things that is absolutely fascinating about architecture in Ethiopia is that this is one of the rare cases of a country in Africa that went through processes of modernization on its own terms and as an independent nation outside of the structures of European colonialism. And because of that, modern architecture has always been a kind of a fascinating hybrid of different concerns and construction methods and even building programs. And through the multiple periods of Ethiopian history in the 20th century, we've seen a number of changes. Dawit might tell you about his research in Addis Ababa in the post-World War II period, especially the golden era of Addis in the 1960s and that period of modernism. But then, a few things happened. Revolution, sort of a period, sort of a fallow period. A sudden explosion in economic growth in Ethiopia. So over the last 2 decades, the country has seen GDP growth that rivals that of India and China over the same period. It's one of the fastest growing countries in the world economically. And part of that has been an influx of capital from Ethiopian emigres living in places like the United States, sending capital back home, which has then been reinvested in real estate and other commercial enterprises. So as a result, there's an enormous explosion of architecture and or of building in all over the country. And so we wanted to catalog some of that, some of those changes in this exhibition. That's really where this all came about.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to help share screen. So, Dawit, did you want to say something before I share screen?
Not a lot, but yeah, after that we met again, it's not only that time. David came back, we were also cooperating. Gave a course, a kind of crash course, a blog, we call it, at Addis Ababa. So then when he came, we made it a point that we also visited some of the projects, not only in Addis Ababa, but also in Hawassa and outside of Addis Ababa. So we I was testing whether, those buildings were sharing, and we exchanged files, and we kind of agreed with the projects. They would say, not this one, and what about this one? So we kind of we selected a number of projects and we agreed on that, and we collaborated on producing those projects.
That's fantastic. And some of the students in the audience will have just completed a studio about building tectonics and construction, and others of them will be beginning that studio. I wonder if, as you introduce these projects, you would consider talking a little bit about the construction language and modes and why they're appropriate to climate or a program or anything you think that would help us. Everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is Dutch Embassy in Addis Ababa. It is built by Dutch and Ethiopian Design by Dutch and Ethiopian architects. So it tries in a way to kind of merge the Ethiopian methods. Like you have, they try to represent how rough it could be, the colors, the rock-cut churches. Basically, they want to represent the rock-cut churches, and they want to also show how flat the Netherlands is by kind of leaving water flow on the roof. So there is this flattening at the top, and the rugged nature of the Ethiopian topography is also represented. And this building, in a way, gets into the land and comes out of it. Spaces that represent the northern Ethiopian rock architecture. And there are some sections of this building where you have glasses, complete transparent walls that represent Netherlands. So, and this is, all of the buildings in Ethiopia are passive ventilated. Almost always it's 23 degrees if you're in the shed. We don't witness like above 30 degrees Celsius temperature. So it's massive thermal mass. Yeah, that's what I can say about this building. Great. The next one. Yes. Yeah, this is an iconic building by Seleka Belai. So when we talk of regionalism, Seleka talks about responding to the climate. You would never see a staircase, a basic circulation exposed to the elements in the northern hemisphere. Or, you know, you always want to kind of insulate circulation. But Seleka kind of used circulation as a form defining element. So yeah, so he used the stair, and the stair, you can see inside is also giving a kind of quality to the internal environment. And he uses minimal colors, and he always experiments with forms, with minimal windows. For him, the use of windows to kind of give character to the facade is wrong, according to him. So for him, he can give light. So for him, the most important thing is light, but not through windows. He is very playful with the use of light and how he admits it into. And there are kinds of pigeonholes from the inside. They really look like torch lights, kind of that. So they really admit light, but you don't see them on the facade. And this is an iconic building, the stairs, an iconic building by Seleka Belai. This is a building built by a world famous. In 2020, Elias Simi is the African Artist of the Year by what are the museums in Washington, D.C.? The Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian awarded Elias Simi as the African Artist of the Year in 2020. So yeah, Elias Simi uses discarded materials, everything like the skin is made of mud, but the external things are all kind of recycled. So if you look at like the interior on the right, you have all those mosaics out of wood. So each and every piece of the wood is recycled. So everything is recycled here. And the external material is in a way sculpted. It's like Antonio Gaudi in mud. So, and Elias has this fine skill in designing the interior space. So he has negative spaces, positive spaces, space within space. So it's a very good material to teach students how to articulate space. And everything is recycled and it's made out of mud. That's makes this one special. Yeah, and this is Vena restaurant in Lalibela. It looks kind of some material from a sci-fi or an alien kind of a structure in a rather, if you look at it from the background, you know, it looks very weird, but there were two young boys. Sorry, did I miss it? Oops. Yeah, thank you. So there are two young boys, and they carved these. So they had a philosophy, and they had to build it there. So they have not. They were also designing it while building. So they did not do a kind of a complete working drawing. So they had to be living there for so many months and so it's a complex form. There is a philosophy behind it, but the aesthetics is very special. It's a restaurant, and sitting there, you would see from the top of Lalibela, you would see all the valley across the horizon. So that's it. Yes, this is the Vela building. It's a kind of a cooperation between Kofi and Dawit from Cote d'Ivoire and a local architect, Joseph Abba. So it's very contemporary, the way it's used. So the materials, how they are exposed. It's one of a kind in the city. So what is basic to all the buildings is all are labor intensive. We 100% use, with the exception of a few of them, we use reinforced concrete. So basically it's cast in situ. There's no prefab in Ethiopia. And there is a kind of an aesthetics that is achieved. That is what I can say about this building.
And if I can interject just for a moment about the Yemreha apartments, there's a couple of projects in the exhibition that are designed by architects from other parts of Africa that are in Ethiopia. And one of the things that we really liked about that is that it helps demonstrate the way that architecture acts as a kind of evidence of the worldliness of Ethiopia, especially of Addis Ababa, which is a global diplomatic capital. It's the home of the United Nations, the whole United Nations enterprise in Africa is centered in Addis Ababa. It's also the home of the African Union, and so because of this, there's a great amount of diplomats and foreign businessmen from all over Africa in Addis Ababa, and as a result, you have projects designed by a really brilliant architect from the Ivory Coast, and you'll see other projects as well in our exhibition.
Yes, this is one of my favorite buildings. It is called Lidetta Mercato. You know, Mercato is the word, an Italian word, market. So after the Italians came and to occupy Ethiopia in 1936, they kind of delegated, or they kind of identified a space, Mercato Indigeno, the market for the indigenous people. So the word Mercato lingered in, and that is an open air market, traditional Ethiopian. So that kind of market you would find all over Africa. So it's going to be a bargain market where everything is open air. So there's no boundary and so on and so forth. So this guy, he is a Catalan from Spain. He's a young architect, and he brought in a kind of a facade and a diagonal kind of, so he also created a tunnel, a walkway for pedestrians to be admitted into the building and go out from the other end. And the way he cuts the entrance and the way he treats the facade is also interesting. He tried to kind of imitate the motifs on the clothes, on the fabrics, on Ethiopian fabrics. So he also uses these kind of dots, and you would see from the interior that it's well lit. It's not as dark as you would imagine, but then when you get into the space, you would find a kind of those informal platforms for shops, for markets. So that is why he said Ledeta in Mercato. It's a high rise, it's a modern building, but inside they kind of wanted the market activity to look informal and to kind of bring the idea from the original market. So I have not been there lately, but it is active, and the diagonal, the way the spaces also go is very interesting. You would always, like you would see everyone, you would want to know, you would, while going through, crossing the street within the building, you would really want, we are drawn towards the space. So you can see everything all across diagonally to the topmost floor. And it's very interesting. And the facade material is also done in a very innovative manner. So they have to cast a low-tech kind of casting method used for the facade, but it really gives a fresh look to the otherwise nondescript facade of the city.
I was struck by how solid the exterior of this project feels, and how it seems like that diagonal corner, the corner is carved away, like some of the much older buildings in Ethiopia carved from stone.
Exactly.
And I was so startled and delighted to see how the interior is not dark, is not closed in, but has this really inspiring diagonal atrium leading you to the light.
Yeah.
Is it open air the whole time? Or the top is glassed in? I can't tell from the image.
I'm not very sure. I'll check.
Okay.
I'm not very sure. Yeah.
David, did you want to say anything about this project before?
No, it is extraordinary. And I remember it being glazed at the top. The one thing though that is a little bit deceptive about our photographs is that we photographed there. Actually, the photographs are all by Jürgen Strohmeyer, our partner on the project, and they were right when the building was completed, but before the tenants had moved in. So it's now covered with shop signs on the interior. It's really colorful. It's not as minimalist as it appears from here. Good to know. But I absolutely agree with what you said. The quality of it from the outside, it feels monolithic, like the rock cut churches in La Libella, and then you enter into it, and it is voluminous and light. It's really brilliantly designed, and some of the things too that are hard to tell from just a selection of photographs is how well it integrates with the neighborhood. It seems again kind of shocking that something that is so obdurate and solid would also be contextual, but it works so well with the scale of the neighborhood.
Yeah. And it's really also startling for me to hear, Dawit, that the facade is making reference to Ethiopian tapestries and textiles.
Exactly.
And that the way they figured out how to transform that was through casting. It just feels like they're intersecting two very different technologies, of the woven on a loom, and casting is a completely different technique, but it's a very powerful project. I'm looking forward to seeing it someday.
I feel sad about this project because it's not realized. It was supposed to be, there was a competition from the Ethiopian government in 2012. And the winners, this is like, the winners are from the Netherlands and Ethiopia. So it's very interesting. So these are, they represent the drums, like the emperors, when they had to decree, so they would use the drum and then they would declare it before the court. So then that would be not constituted as part of the law. So the legal entity. So these three drums, they represent the, there are two bodies, legislative bodies. I'm not very sure how they're called, the councils, the parliament, and the other is a library. And then they are surrounded with low-lying kind of office space. And the public could also go up and access the roof. It's in a way making it very near to the community. I love those drums with the Ethiopian motifs again. And I mean, if it were built, this would have been like the best creative and eye-catching and iconic building in town. But yeah, so they were into the detail design. It was very huge. It really took a huge block at the city center. Opposite it is before World War building, and kind of with little additions, 60-ish additions by Henry Shome. So opposite it is the seat of the parliament. But then after 2018, our current prime minister went for making this part of a huge network of open urban space. So there is a huge urban space now as part of the central, it's a kind of a central park for us. So I'm happy that we are now getting huge open urban spaces, but it's sad that we're missing out. Maybe it will be built elsewhere, I'm not sure. So the space where this is supposed to be built is now gone.
I wondered if this drum form has shown up in other works of contemporary Ethiopian architecture. It seems like this, the cupping form that was on the hill that you said had a great view of the valley by the two young designers. It feels something, I'm not used to seeing it, and I wonder if there's something.
And the scale is much more different,
Yes.
So yeah, comparably, this would be it would be so huge. Imagine it's like one is sitting thousands of people. So
yes.
Yeah.
David, did you want to add something?
No, I think you guys are both right on in the interpretation of it. Oh, the one thing that I will add, just because people haven't been there, is that Addis Ababa is, well, like almost all Ethiopian cities, it's quite hilly. The topography is dramatic, and within Addis itself, there is an almost 2,000 foot change in elevation within the city limits. And so this site is on a hill, very close to the hill that was the center of imperial power when the city was founded. But because of that topography, one of the brilliant things about the design is that this level top, the kind of datum that separates the office functions from the dramatic meeting functions, that datum I think was at ground level at the uppermost part of the site, and then by the time you get downhill it's several stories in the air. And so this relationship between this tabletop level space that became this public outdoor space that the public could enter at the uppermost level, which is right at a major traffic intersection, was such a wonderful idea too, because these complexes in Ethiopia tend to be very highly controlled and off limits to the public. And I think originally there was this promise that the public could inhabit that main upper level. That would have been a really dramatic change in the way that you think of the relationship between government and public space. But yeah, it was a really beautiful project, and it is unfortunate that wasn't realized.
Just so you know, Dawit, we used the drum that inspired this to inspire our gallery graphic. I will get that for you so you can see. I had one other question about this Dutch embassy project. When I looked at Ethiopian architecture from more than 1,000 years ago, this color appears. Could you tell me more about that?
So the color, basically it's the color of the sandstone where it's carved out.
Yes.
Well, if you go to Lalibela, you would look, but here they've used colors with the concrete.
Yes.
And they finished it off roughly just to kind of relate it with the rough kind of texture of the rock churches.
So is this something that they actually got from local soil and sand, or they dyed it to match local soil and sand?
So they dyed it with.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I see we have, I'm sorry, maybe we have elements in, there's a question from Rebecca DeJenny in the chat. Her question is, by designing contemporary buildings, do you think Ethiopia and other African countries are losing touch with vernacular architecture? Not necessarily the projects you have selected, but she remembers going to Addis and seeing so many buildings that seemed out of place.
Yes, I mean, our selection is like a drop in an ocean if you compare it with what is being built, like hundreds of thousands of houses, social housing, and all sorts of buildings are being built. And, many are built by developers. They would fly to Shenzhen and Dubai and, China and the Middle East and Qatar, and they will come and want to build those skyscrapers. So for me, those things are out of place. They require energy to maintain. So we are entirely, Addis has one of the best climates, not because I'm from Addis, but I've traveled to quite other few places, throughout. It's really a very agreeable climate, and we're not building for our climate. So what she said is true. But this morning we had a lecturer from Malawi, the Malawian president of the Malawi Institute of Architects president, and we asked her what was Malawian in Lilongwe now? What would be Addis Ababa in Addis? So what could be? One could be climate, responding to climate. Then you can go to materiality. Then you can go to sustainability. Like our officials now are talking about smart buildings, smart city. Would it be as smart as the one built in Vienna, for example, high-tech, IT-based, or would it be smart from being low-tech? For me, being low-tech is smart because we're smartly using a lot of labor, unemployed, using local materials, less embodied energy. So there is a kind of misunderstanding between the client, the community, and architects. So what she said is right.
I wanted to share one other project and get your take on the tectonics of it. I was surprised by the Embassy of South Africa. And are you seeing that project now, David?
Yeah.
So could each of you tell us a little bit about the screening and the variation in this project?
Well, one thing is that this is another example of the way that Addis Ababa has ended up as a place with work by architects from other countries in Africa. In this case, it's MMA Studio that are really prominent South African architects who worked with, I think, Rahel Shaw on this one, right, Dawit?
Yes.
Yeah, who's one of the really great, I guess, a younger generation of Ethiopian architects. I mean, younger, like, our age-ish. But the screens, I think, were the work of South African artist who was commissioned by the South African government to produce this screen work around the part of the building that faces the main intersection in the road. And it's visible. There's a security wall around the building, so you can't really see the ground level from outside, but the screen acts as a kind of an enormous public artwork that's visible outside. But yeah, it was an attempt by the South African government to commission work by a South African architect to represent the country in this diplomatic architecture.
Yeah, and this is one of the few buildings that I have not had access to visit, basically. So we have, Addis is a kind of a diplomatic city, and there are even papers that talk of how embassies kind of affected the morphology of the city. So there are so many embassies, and I have not had the chance to see the building. Again, with how South Africans from South Africa and Ethiopians collaborated to kind of bring such an aesthetics. You see the transparent material and the very solid stone. So in Ethiopia, you have stone as a building material. It's very mountainous. Then there is this transparent facade. And yeah, this is a mix of both cultures. And yeah, that is what I can talk about this building.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop share there. So I'm curious, when David spoke in our gallery earlier this autumn, he spoke about some of the organizing principles of the curation of this work. Dawit, I wondered if you could share with us what you were most excited by in the selection of projects, and what maybe resonates with you most about the work that you did select. Because as you say, a drop in the ocean of contemporary architecture.
Yeah, so I would say we were pioneers in Ethiopia about talking about architecture. Because, after the millennium, as David earlier rightly expressed it, we began to have money. Where there's money, where there's finance, you have art and music and literature, every other of the creative industry. So it was not very easy to select projects because everybody wants that position. I was at the receiving end of criticism even after posting those projects. Dawit, who do you think you are? And fortunately or unfortunately, it was a product of very few artists. Although we selected more than 20 or 25 projects, like some were in a way overrepresented. That was also, and those are very creative architects. In fact, we've not selected all of their projects just for the sake of representation. Zaleka might bring you more interesting ones into, so, or Rahel or Yosef. So I was happy that it was a groundbreaking thing. It's a pioneering thing to discuss architects. So everybody in Ethiopia is now quiet about who is doing good or who is doing bad. And we did in a way kind of announce it, tell it from the mountains that there is good architecture in Ethiopia. So some would say everything is rubbish, or if you fly in from the airport and go through the main road to wherever you are, you would really see skyscrapers, glassy thing. You would know whether you're in Dubai or Addis Ababa. But then these jewels, they are hidden. You have to really walk around to find them. So then I'm so happy that we made a statement to the Ethiopian public, to architects, that, and now, I didn't buy the position, but now we are considered, whatever we say is listened to. whatever we speak is like is respected. So what I'm happy about the fact that we brought forth the hidden architects, I would say. So that is what gets me fulfilled in a way.
I wanted to add something too, because Dawit isn't giving you the whole story because of his innate modesty. But when we opened the exhibition, we opened it originally in two places. In Miami, it was at the Center for Architecture, which is run by the local chapter of the AIA. But in Addis, the question of, all right, where do you put it? We had it at the Goethe Institute, basically the German Cultural Institute, for lack of a better venue. But as a result of the exhibition, and correct me if I'm wrong about the chronology here, Dawit, but the Association of Ethiopian Architects then realized that they needed to have some kind of a public space for exhibitions, for lectures and presentations. And they opened Addis Hall, which is the now ground floor gallery space in kind of a funny building. It's a building from the late 1970s. It was a review stand that was built by the communist government in the 70s.
Now it's gone. It's not anymore. Before a few weeks, it's gone. Very sad story.
Oh, all right. Well, temporarily, we had this exhibition space in Addis, and it had this central location. It was right in Meskel Square. So as a result, it had incredible visibility, and the AEA, the Association of Ethiopian Architects, would host public events like design charrettes, talking about the design of public space in the city. And so there was a participatory attitude toward shaping public space that had not been a part of the 20th century discourses, which tended to be the sort of more standard elite. We're hiring these designers, and they might be brilliant designers like Henri Chaumet or whomever, but there was always this more top-down approach to designing a city. And finally, there was this public participation through this space, but that space existed in part because of opening the exhibition in Addis in 2016. I'm sad to hear that it's gone, though. That's
Very
unfortunate.
sad. We really felt the feeling, yeah. So it's only a few weeks ago that we realized it's gone for good. But it's okay. We will have our own another space.
Yeah.
So I'm curious also, a lot of people in the audience are practicing architecture all over the planet. Could you characterize, Dawit, how the practice of architecture works in terms of, our team structures, how the contractors or construction is kind of shared team member, or more like in the United States like this, a litigious relationship between the architect and the builder? In Switzerland, I understand that all the construction documents are done by the construction firm. So the architect is kind of coming up with schematic and then stepping back. And so there's no litigation, it seems, because, so I'm curious, how does it work in Addis, or your experience of practice?
So let me start by telling you that land belongs to the government. It's publicly owned.
All the land.
Private land in
like Singapore.
So that brings us into, like, then if the land belongs to the government, so that is what we have basically. So the government wants to stop speculation. So there is always going to be a competitive lease bid. So you would bid like per square meters, 300,000 per, or I don't know how to, like $10,000 per square meters.
Sure.
Or so that is how it gets expensive. So then after that, once the developer gets that land, the developer needs to build in 6 months' time, start construction. So that means design is done in a kind of a rush, unless it belongs to the embassies. So they build in their land. It belongs to a government thing, because if you have in a government, you have eternity to design it, you know? So you can do something nice. But with respect, so long as these private developers are concerned, you have to do it very quick. Then you know that some things would be changed while you build. So that means we quickly produce schematics and then we do the statistics calculation. We don't do a lot of mechanical design because almost everything is naturally ventilated if you don't do a skyscraper. So up to 20 stories, you open the window. That's the context in Addis, for example. So then we award it to a contractor. So in a competitive bid, then we don't get paid by design. So Ethiopia, because we were not colonized, we don't have the baggage from the British, like the Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, they use simply the riba, and the Francophones use the French. So yeah, they don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we always reinvent the wheel in Ethiopia. You know, the flip side of not being colonized is we always, like we just came out of a marathon kind of review of the licensing of architects. So we don't know what to do with even licensing. So we have our own crazy kind of thing, like our Christmas tomorrow. That's crazy. So we have all of our, you know, how do I say, unique things. So then architects are better paid at the supervision, unlike in Switzerland. So we're more engaged. So we do the redesigning, the kind of fine tuning the details. We find, so there is list coordination on the drawings. So we don't have a kind of a regulation which says 6% of the project gets, the architect gets, you know, for these schematics, preliminary documentation, bidding, whatever those things. We don't get paid for them. We are paid peanuts. If you get out of the project,
I stopped things there. Our conversation kept going, but I want everyone in this audience to have a chance to engage with Dawit Benti, who is on the Zoom chat with us. So I'm hoping we can take some live questions that people have emerging from looking at that work and hearing Dawit speak about the nature of practice or buildings. Are there any questions?
I was gonna ask a question as far as the recycled material that you use on some of the buildings. What kind of tests do you put them through? Like, for example, fire resistant or tension or other things that go through the material? Like, how do you guys test them so you guys know that it's stable?
So basically, recycling is a very recent phenomena in Ethiopian architecture, but yes, that's a big question. So
I find it very intriguing. That's why it's like very, because I know here in the US, you know, it's just mostly wood, steel, you know, concrete in some places. So I would want to know, like, how can other countries make the shift, you know, to at a smaller scale, and then it could probably lead to a big impact on construction or in architecture.
I must admit that we don't have very stringent fire and other codes, existing codes that we have to stick to. So maybe we're using our liberty, but yeah, it's a point of concern, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if you saw the question posed by Eric in the chat. He wanted to understand how underpaid architects are in Ethiopia. I think.
Cool. I have been to some African nations, and as I try to mention, they use their the Anglophone and the Francophone, they use their respective former colonial powers. So in Ethiopia, we don't have that, and we're the least paid, and we cannot leave off of design these days. But then there is this option of doing the design supervision. So that means the design control, and we don't usually have enough time to coordinate like the different engineering disciplines, and of course adjustment to the site, and so many questions and so many answers. We will then get involved in supervision, and that would in a way compensate the fee for architects. But otherwise, if we stop at the designing stage, it's a peanut. And that is also from my experience of architecture, architects' fee from other African nations. So I would say less than 1%, like 0.05, or yeah, it goes down to that extent.
And there's a question from a faculty member, Zorana. She mentions that in former Yugoslavia, Serbia, the land's owned by the government as well, and effectively developers are renting or leasing the land for 99 years. Is that the same period of time?
Yes, that is exactly it. So the government, you know, there's like, so there was a law around the millennium, maybe roughly around the millennium, which states if you own a land previously, then that remains with you. But if you sell it, then it will get into the lease system. And the lease system, you would be given the license to use it for 99 years. If it is very expensive, then for less years than that, but it's similar system.
Got it. And Spirit has a question. Go for it, Spirit.
Hi, so you mentioned that there's a lot of building happening right now. So is there a master plan in some of the larger cities? And if not, how do you feel about that, or just the rapid growth?
There is a master plan, but you know that master plans are doomed to fail. You know, I think in different extents all over the world. So we've been debating about master plan, strategic plan, and so many kinds of modalities. But, you know, for example, there is a huge green area left for as a percentage of the whole land use, but then it will be filled with informal squatters, settlers. So, and then there are interventions from different actors, for example, these multinationals, and so on and so forth. So we do have, and it's still the guiding, like zoning, height regulation, land use, what have you, roads proportion, and so on and so forth. But then it's debatable whether we follow it to the detail or not. But in Ethiopia, the government is heavily involved in the economy, so we have a lot of development. For example, the social housing, like in Sweden, and post-war housing in Europe, in some places, and in Eastern Europe, like you have those buildings as far as your eyes can see, especially at the periphery. So you could drive for kilometers, and then you would only witness those, those social housing units.
Oh,
Sorry, there's a question by a faculty member, Michael Fiorillo.
Oh, okay.
Get the next one.
Thank you, Karen. I was just curious. I have to apologize in advance. I missed the beginning of the talk, so you may have covered this. So just let me know. I'm just wondering, to what degree issues around sustainability, resilience, climate adaptation have worked their way into the practice of design there in Ethiopia.
A very interesting question. Most of the issues or books on sustainability in the northern hemisphere or in the West discuss energy.
Yeah.
But for us, that's not a problem. Like we throughout the year have like 23 degrees if you are in the shed, and colder. So especially in the Ethiopian highlands, it's almost, because we are on 2,500, for example, Addis Ababa. So we almost always have optimal air. And what is very unsustainable in the Western world is the use of energy to condition the internal environment. So if you build a house, thermal mass, stone, or whatever, it's so we're seldom confronted with air conditioning technology. So what we are losing is water. So, and water is not a big problem in the Northern Hemisphere. I remember I went to Vienna to take a course on sustainable architecture, and I witnessed they were using water to clean the boats around the lake. So I was saying, oh, I came to the wrong place to learn about sustainability, you know. So we needed to skill on the use of mud, skill on the use of bamboo, but it was all about energy optimization, which was not a big, I mean, at least so far as Ethiopia is concerned, it's not a big deal. So whatever we do, we say is sustainable. Open the windows, fantastic.
Very good. Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Hannah, did you want to ask
Yep.
the question?
Sure, I can ask it. I was just wondering, because the land belongs to the government, how that impacts historic preservation. Is there a tendency to build more, build less, or what's the correlation there?
Very good question. And because of this, I was like working to establish the Society of Architectural Historians of Ethiopia. So, you know, we always everywhere have this kind of tension between development and preservation. So Addis started, it's a 20th century city. It's a few years older than 100 years. So, but we have gems that were built at the 20th century buildings. So there is a tendency to consider them as the thing of the past and to demolish them. So we are always struggling to keep the buildings. And, you know, like officials, developers, they fly to Shenzhen or Dubai or Qatar. It's very near to us than to the West. So they go there and look at those flashy buildings, and that's what they want to bring in. But there is a kind of awareness by the community. There is a kind of bottom-up movement to cry when a building is demolished. And we are now, everybody at the moment seems sensitive to really maintain the heritage buildings. But it's still an everyday struggle, I would say.
Dawit, I want to thank you for this really delightful exhibit, this important work of advocacy that you're doing. And I hope you will continue to refresh this exhibit so we can host it again in 2030. If everyone would turn on their sound and give Dawit a hand, that would be great.
Thank you very much.
And we hope to see you in Boston next round. Okay.
Yeah.
You will.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
Great, Dawit. Really delightful.